Okay, I'm going to start my talk now. I'm Saddharaja, and my talk is entitled The Gift of the Dharma. So here we go. So in 2010, I had a very, very strong and significant spiritual experience. Probably one of the strongest of my life, because it was kind of unexpected. I found myself circumambulating a large Buddhist monument in the middle of a park on a sunny morning in northeast India. So I was in Sarnath in the deer park in northeast India. I was with my friend Dharma Siddhi, and we were circumambulating the Dharmic stupa, and we were chanting the Shakyamuni mantra, Om Muni Muni Maha Muni Shakyamuni Swaha. So then we started off a bit awkward because we were the only white people there. There were quite a lot of pilgrims from around the world. We're the only white people there, so we started off a little bit awkward, but we soon got into it. And after about 20 minutes, something quite strange happened. Well, it happened for me anyway. It was as if life completely stood still. It was like time and space were suspended. And I was just there, walking, chanting, circumambulating, completely mindful, completely present, didn't want to be anywhere else. It was as if I'd been there forever. It was quite a wonderful experience. It didn't last very long, but it's very deep and significant and very important. And it happened for something similar happened for Dharma Siddhi as well. We were on pilgrimage together, and we'd come a long way. We'd come from our homes in Cambridge, and we were touring all the different Buddhist pilgrimage sites in northeast India. And we realized that what we were doing was an act of devotion which for us symbolized a large part of our adult lives. Yeah, there we were in northeast India circumambulating, but it was for us a very important symbolic moment. What we realized is that we were circumambulating the exact spot, the very, very spot where the Buddha had first taught the Dharma, given the gift of the Dharma to the 5 ascetics 2,500 years ago. We were there at the very exact spot. So there's a whole talk that I could give on the Buddha's first teaching of the Dharma. It's such a big, important point in the Buddha's life, but not tonight. So Sarnath is where the Buddha first taught the Dharma for the first time. He gave the gift of the Dharma for the first time. The first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, the 8-spoked golden wheel of the Dharma. So being a Sarnath for me really completed something, because I was a Dharma teacher. I have been a Dharma teacher for over 30 years. At that point, I'd been a Dharma teacher for 20 years. And it was very satisfying and meaningful to be there at that very spot where the Buddha had first taught the gift of the Dharma. So a question arises at this point, well, what do we mean by giving the gift of the Dharma? What does that actually really mean? And the answer is very straightforward. It really means communicating the teachings of the Buddha, the Dharma, spreading the Dharma to other people who haven't heard it before, didn't know about it. That's really what it is. But once again, there's a whole series of talks I think I could give on what that really is. It's a huge subject in itself. So tonight I'm just going to make a few important points about that. What I'll do is I'll quote Sangharakshita's simple and profound summary of Buddhism itself. So this is what Sangharakshita says. Buddhism is a universal teaching. It speaks to all people. It speaks to them, moreover, not as belonging to any particular social group, for example, clan, tribe, caste, race, nation, but as individual human beings. What it tells each one of them is that he or she can grow, that they can grow from humanhood to Buddhahood, that they can grow from unenlightened humanity into enlightened humanity. It also tells them how they can do this. So this is what the Buddha did in Sarnath 2,500 years ago. He showed the 5 ascetics how they could grow from unenlightened humanity to enlightened humanity, how they could become free. And actually they did become free. Several months later, they also became enlightened themselves. So on that very first occasion that the Buddha taught the Dharma, gave the gift of the Dharma, he taught 3 particular doctrinal teachings. He taught the 4 noble truths, the noble eightfold path, and he taught the middle way. That's what the scriptures tell us. And for the rest of the Buddha's life, which was another 45 years, he spent the whole of his life carrying on giving the gift of the Dharma, teaching the Dharma to all sorts of people in North India at that time. So this was a great act of generosity on the part of the Buddha. So you could say that generosity is a really, really big part of Buddhist practice itself. And well, we've got the series at the moment on generosity. We've talked about the Dharma economy. We've talked about the whole scope of giving within the Buddhist tradition. And tonight is yet another talk on that subject. There is a traditional list in Buddhism of the kinds of things that Buddhists can give. And it's a really useful traditional list, actually. It shows you the scope and breadth of the whole practice of Dharma. And the first of these is material things. So this is what Buddhists can give. They can give material things. So that includes anything from a cup of tea, give somebody a cup of tea, right the way through to millions and millions of pounds. Absolutely anything material that people need in their lives that can benefit their lives, a Buddhist can give those things. So that's covering an awful lot in itself, anything material at all. The second thing you might find quite interesting, it's the practice of fearlessness. Fearlessness. This is another traditional gift that the Buddhist gives. It's quite a frightening world sometimes. A lot of people are running scared of all the kind of problems that the world exists. I don't need to mention what we're all scared of at the moment. And the news, the media is full of it. And a lot of people are very, very anxious, afraid. But a traditional thing that a Buddhist gives is fearlessness, courage, to deal with the frightening and concerning things that the world contains. The third thing is that the Buddhist gives, traditional thing, is education, the gift of education. And well, I've talked before on Sangha Night about the great Buddhist teacher, Dr. Ambedkar in India, of course, who promoted education amongst millions of people in India. So education is so important because without it, it's very difficult to really navigate the world and understand what's going on a basic level, never mind trying to understand the Dharma as well. So you need an education to really have a decent human life beyond anything else. So the gift of education is very, very important. Fourthly, we've got life and limbs. This might not be something that you kind of ever think about, that you might have to give your life in the service of the Dharma. But a quick look at the history of Buddhism in Tibet will show that that's something that often came up for monks and nuns in their life in the Dharma, particularly during the invasion of the extreme situation of the invasion of Tibet by the Chinese in the 1950s. The The fifth thing that Buddhists can give are merits. As we practice in Buddhism, we often accumulate all sorts of skills and talents and merits. There's a kind of circle of merit around us. People appreciate us. Kula Priya has just been rejoicing in my merits, which is a nice thing to do. But when that happens, we build merit. What we don't do is we don't sort of put it into a little pot and keep it like pound coins and accumulate it and all keep it all for ourselves. We try and sort of spread that out into the wider community. We call that transferring merits, and that's one of the ways that we work with merit. We can give merit away. And the sixth of the traditional list is the Dharma, the gift of the Dharma, and that's said to be the greatest gift of all. It's the most important thing that you can give. Why is that? Why is the Dharma the most important thing that you can give? Well, the reason for that is the Dharma and the Dharma alone can help us to become free from greed, hatred, and delusion. It can help us solve the problem of old age, sickness, and death. Most other things can't do that. Sangha once said that teaching the Dharma is more important than many, many lives as a social worker. And it's not that he was decrying the very important work of social work, because it is very, very important. But what he's saying is that when you give in these other ways, you're giving a lot, but you're not helping people necessarily to get free of old age, sickness, and death, and to escape the wheel of samsara. Only really the Dharma can do that and help us to become spiritually free. So that's what Buddhism does, and it gives us the tools to do that. So these tools are what we call Buddhism. So what is Buddhism, essentially, we might ask? What does it consist of? Sangha once said Buddhism consists of three things. Its symbols, its concepts, its symbols, and its practices. So with concepts, Buddhist concepts, there's only really one Buddhist concept, really, that we need to concern ourselves with. And that's called dependent arising, or conditionality. Or to give it its Sanskrit name, Practice Samutpada, the law of conditionality. And that's the central Buddhist concept, if you like. And it's the view of the world that says that all things whatsoever arise in dependence upon conditions. Take those conditions away, and that thing ceases. So a flower grows in dependence upon the seed, the sunshine, the soil, and the rain. The money that appears in your bank account every month arises in dependence on the work that you're doing. The positive mental state that you're currently enjoying arises in dependence upon the meditation that you've just done. This is the way that Practice Samutpada works. And without this concept, we can't really grow spiritually. Without really understanding, accepting this concept, we can't really grow. It's very, very subtle. It's very, very deep. And it's a very, very profound concept. So what about symbols? What about the symbols of Buddhism? What are they? There's quite a lot of them. And once again, they can be a very effective means of communication. There's the symbol of the Buddha himself. All sorts of people recognize Buddhist images, and it communicates something to them. There's also the symbol of the path to enlightenment. People know what a path is. You walk down it and you get somewhere. There's the symbol of the lotus, which represents spiritual unfoldment. And there's the symbol of the wheel of life, yeah, which represents the cyclic, transitory world that we all live in. Also, there's the symbol of the eight-spoked golden wheel, the Dharma chakra, which represents the teaching of the Buddha itself. So all these symbols can communicate something to us quite directly without even knowing what they are sometimes. And I had an experience of this when I was a child. When I was 14, I went on a school trip to the British Museum. Some of you might have heard this story. And I encountered, there I was in my school uniform, aged 14, if you can imagine that, and with all these other kids running around the British Museum in 1973. And I encountered a massive marble statue of the Buddha Amitabha, which is 6 meters high. It's still there, it's been there since 1938. And it was actually carved in the 6th century in Hebei province in China. And it communicated something to me. There I was as a teenager, and I just stood looking at it for quite a long time. And eventually the teacher had to come and get me and said, look, the coach is ready, we're going. And you need to come. Because I just stood in front of the statue. So something was communicated to me by the sculptors back in the 6th century China. I produced this beautiful statue. You can go and see it in the British Museum. But something was communicated to me through that symbol of the Buddha. Finally, we've got the practices of Buddhism, and there are so many of them. Reading and studying the Dharma is a practice. Going on retreat is a practice of Buddhism. Meditating, what we've just been doing here, is a practice. There's devotional practice, there's puja. There's our ethical practice, there's the 5 precepts, chanting and putting them into practice in our daily lives. There's spiritual friendship, reflection and contemplation of the teachings. And of course, generosity is a practice in itself. Attending Sangha Night is a practice. So these are all ways that we can put the Buddha's teaching into practice. This is what we do as Buddhists. So last week we had a talk, excellent talk from Sanganath about his experience of being on the receiving end of something being given to him. So I'm going to talk about being on the receiving end of hearing the Dharma myself. And after that Amitabha incident, I was on the receiving end of the Dharma in all sorts of different ways, through books. Over the next few years, I met a number of Buddhists in my teenage years and early 20s, and I learned meditation. I was taught meditation, and I went on retreat and heard talks. The first Buddhist book I ever read after that Amitabha was called What the Buddha Taught by a Sri Lankan monk called Walpola Rahula. I also bought a book called The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. Not that good for Dharma books, really. I mean, they were all right, but they were good enough for me to kind of get into something. I remember sitting in my parents' living room, aged 14, reading these books, and my parents sort of had the telly on, and I was going, yes, yes. I was reading this book, absolutely, yes, I agree with that. And they were kind of wondering what on earth was going on, really. I hadn't shown that much enthusiasm for my schoolwork, But yeah, it really, those books really spoke to me. It was very, very important reading them. I also met a lot of people over the next few years. Zen teachers I got to know, Tibetan teachers I got to know. And then when I was 24, I got to know Saddharaja. I met him at Pamaloka Retreat Centre. What really impressed me about it was he didn't tell me who he was. He just had a really human conversation with me about the Dharma and about life. And later on, I found out that that was actually Sangha. He hadn't bothered to introduce himself. He just had a human conversation with me, which I was really impressed with. I learned meditation from books. I also learned at the Milton Keynes Peace Pagoda, which I helped build as a young man. I learned meditation, but really I learned meditation at Padmaloka, the Metta Bhavana and the mindfulness of breathing, when I was 24. I started going on retreat at Vajraloka and Padmaloka. And I remember a particular talk I went to in a health centre in the Norfolk town of Diss, which was given by Subhuti in the 1980s. But it had a really strong effect upon me. Unfortunately, I can't remember the title of the talk or anything about it, but I know it really made a difference. So it was something like this, the kind of talk that I'm giving now. But it had a really, really strong effect upon me. So much was given to me as a teenager and as a young man by others. If that gift hadn't been given by teachers, by speakers, by writers, by practitioners back then I wouldn't be here now involved in this. The link is really obvious, and my gratitude is profound. In terms of my own experience of giving the gift of the Dharma, yeah, I do that. I do that and have done that for quite a few years. It's a natural, why do I do that? It's a natural extension of my Buddhist practice. One of the things I really like about it is it helps me to stop my ego clinging. It benefits me because it helps me to get out of the way. When I'm communicating the Dharma, I'm a conduit for the Dharma. I'm someone I'm concerned about other people, that the Dharma is communicated clearly and effectively to them and they benefit from it. The fact that it's me doing it is less important. I'm just there to present something and communicate something. So it's not like an episode of Strictly Come Dancing, where in Strictly Come Dancing, there you are, the judges are judging your performance. And that's the bit that matters. Well, it's not like that with Dharma teaching. It's not a performance. You're there for other people and their practice of the Dharma and their context. So I've been teaching over 30 years, and in the 1980s I was teaching in the Ipswich and working for the Dharma in the Ipswich area, Ipswich Buddhist Centre. In the 90s it was the Colchester Buddhist Centre I was working at, developing. And I've also been working in Cambridge, the Cambridge Centre, right up to the present. I worked for 25 years in Windhorse Trading, which was a Buddhist business. I've also taught and led retreats in many UK Buddhist centres. Since 2003, I've been working in India, in the Indian cities of Mumbai, Nagpur, Pune, Hyderabad centres. Also, many little countryside villages and towns I've been teaching the Dharma in the last 17 years. And now more recently, I'm developing and teaching the Dharma in Calcutta, in West Bengal. So that's my current project. Well, whenever I'm doing this stuff, I often think about this short little quote which Sangha once wrote. Here it is. Giving is the natural unforced interchange of one's energy with that of others. In this sense, real giving is receiving. And I'd say that's definitely what's been my experience over the years, is by giving the Dharma, I'm actually receiving myself a great deal. These days, I'm also doing a lot more teaching online in the UK and in India. And recently, I led co-led a retreat online, which was the first experience I've ever had. So by teaching the Dharma, I have to practice the Dharma thoroughly myself. I have to exemplify, at least to some extent, or it wouldn't work. Teaching also means I must reflect deeply on what I'm teaching, make sure it really is the Dharma and that it is skillfully put across. So all this is a good thing for me, but hopefully, more importantly, it's a good thing for other people. In 2011, I gave a talk in a little village in the middle of Chhattisgarh, which is in central India, right in the middle of nowhere. And I've been visiting some Buddhist monuments, and I was traveling in a jeep with an order member. I was going home. But what I didn't know is he arranged for me to give a talk in a town, and he didn't bother to tell me that. And we drove into this town, and there was about 100 people all in the road, all kind of waving, expecting me. And they kind of processed with me to the village hall, and where I was supposed to give a Dharma talk. Anyway, but what they discovered is there was no one around who could speak English, who could translate for me. And this frantic search went on. Eventually, this young chap stepped forward who was actually a Christian, but he had perfect English. He was some kind of school teacher. So he translated for me. I remember thinking, what's this going to be like? You know, I'm teaching the Dharma, but it's being translated by a Christian. What's that going to be like, really? And actually, he gave a really great translation. Everyone told me afterwards it was really excellent. Anyway, something odd happened at the end, because he came over to me, this young man. He said, wow, he said, Buddhism is a really wonderful, beautiful religion, isn't it? I'm really, really attracted to that. I think I'm going to try and explore that now. And which was the last thing I expected to hear. I don't really know whether he ever did. I haven't heard. I haven't ever been back there since. Interesting experience. So traditionally speaking, when you do teach the Dharma, you're trying to do two things. You're trying to promulgate the truth, and you're trying to refute error. So in the first case, you are keen to give as accurate account, an clear explanation of the Buddha's teaching in terms of its letter and its spirit. So you really want to communicate the Dharma as accurately and as clearly as you can, as was taught by the Buddha. You want to do that with faith, so that it can transform people's lives. So you need to be clear, experienced, and full of faith. In the second aspect, in the refutation of error, you need to distinguish with clarity what the Dharma isn't. It's very important people don't get the wrong idea about the Dharma. So in a kindly way, you do need to correct wrong views that people might have about it. So for instance, no, there is no creator God in Buddhism. People do need to know that. So you have to call out fuzzy thinking and modern views like relativism or pseudo-universalism. You've got to try and weed out that kind of stuff in a skillful way as possible. So you need communication skills to be able to do that. And of course, there's probably a third thing that you need to do when you're teaching, to try and do as much of this kind of thing as you can, as you're able to do in your life. Teach the Dharma as much as you can. About 10 years ago in this regard, I was teaching the Dharma an awful lot. I was teaching it in the UK a lot and in India. I was doing so much teaching. One night I had this dream where I was driving a tractor, and on the back of the tractor had an enormous muck spreader on the tractor. And in a way, this wasn't really a dream. It was a memory, I think, because I grew up in the countryside in Cumbria, and I used to work on farms in my teens. And I can remember going to a farm. I was working on a farm. I used to work for this farmer called Arthur Wilson. And he said to me one day, okay, can you load up the tractor with the muck spreader? You see that field out there? He said, I want you to get as much of this muck all over that field as you can. So I was driving up and down the field. I had a great big lever on the side. I used to sort of pull this lever down. All this muck was just spraying all over the field. And it was great. It was very satisfying. I enjoyed it. And the thing is, without that muck going on at the field, those crops couldn't grow. They wouldn't be fertilized and they couldn't grow, and nothing could happen. Years later, I heard that Bhante had once said, money is a bit like muck, it needs to be spread around. And I think it's true with the Dharma as well. The more you can spread the Dharma around the field, as it were, the better. Because it's my belief that if more people in the world could hear the Dharma, because most people don't hear it, then I think the world would be changed. It would become a different place. So just getting towards the end now. In the life of the Buddha, the scriptures tell us that he was inclined, after enlightenment, he gained enlightenment, a very, very profound and life-changing experience. After his enlightenment, he was inclined to say nothing. He just wanted to sit there, taking in the enormity of the spiritual experience he'd had. The truth, as he saw it, seemed to be beyond most people, and immersed as people were in greed, hatred, and delusion, he didn't think that anyone would be able to understand it, so he remained silent. But the scriptures tell us that the great god Brahma Sampati, with his enormous big beard, appeared before the Buddha, and he was really concerned that the Buddha did teach. So he implored the Buddha, he begged the Buddha to teach the Dharma. If the Buddha didn't teach, then there'd be no way out of this endless cycle of death and rebirth that human beings were subject to. So it's quoted as saying, "There are just a few whose eyes are covered with only a little dust. For their sake, Lord, teach the truth you have realized." Well, it seems that this appeal got through to the Buddha. And the scriptures tell us that he looked out over the world with his eye of insight, and he saw that the mass of humanity as one big lake of lotuses. Some lotuses were submerged right down in the mud, most of them in fact. Some had grown up to the surface, or sitting on the surface, and just a few were standing completely proud of the surface itself. It's said that the Buddha was overwhelmed with compassion, the Mahakaruna. And there and then he decided to teach the Dharma. Well, there's lots of ways that you can view this incident, whether it literally happened or whether it's symbolic. That's up to you. There are so many ways that the Dharma can be given, and the Buddha gave the Dharma. But today, we teach meditation, we write books, we build the institutions of Triratna, we teach meditation courses, we lead events like Sangha Day. These are all essential and effective methods of giving the gift of the Dharma. But not everyone within the Sangha is in a position to give the Dharma in that way, or has the inclination. Some people can, some people can't. But there's a truly important way that everyone can give the gift of the Dharma, and that is exemplification and wholeheartedness. We can all communicate the Dharma through practicing it. If we do that, people will notice. Something important will be communicated through our actions of body, speech, and mind. People will notice just by the way that we are. So I'd like to encourage you all to do that. So I'll finish this talk with a short poem. It's from the 18th century Japanese hermit poet called Ryokan, who was another great communicator of the Dharma. So it's a poem about the Buddha. Here we go. Even if a man lives 100 years, his life is like a floating weed, drifting with the waves, east and west continually, no time for rest. Shakyamuni renounced nobility and devoted his life to preventing others from falling into ruin. On the earth 80 years, proclaiming the Dharma for 50, bestowing the sutras as an eternal legacy. Today, still a bridge to cross over to the other shore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saddharaja. Every bit the wonderful talk that I was expecting you to deliver this evening. Very rich, profound, loads in it to take to our groups to discuss in more detail. I think what I particularly loved in a way was that you went through the stages of not just explaining what the gift of the Dharma is, although you did that, but why the gift of the Dharma is important. It's important because it changes lives, and you told us from your own lived experience of how that had changed your life from the age of 14 up until now and from now on. And not only that, in a way, but how, I suppose, in a way, how that change manifests. So the gift of the Dharma kind of changed your lives in certain ways, which manifested in you then giving the Dharma to other people, and that sort of chain reaction sort of taking place. It was very, very, very lovely and very experiential. I loved all your anecdotes from your own past and your own life, a very rich life that you've led.